In 2013, I had the absolute pleasure of working with Irish singer-songwriter Luka Bloom to photograph his Australian tour, culminating with a big shoot in Byron Bay at Blues Fest and a portrait session with him that ended up being published in his book Home Place. Today on Words and Music with Nathan Kelly, we catch up with Luka from his home in Ireland, and of course we talk about words and music and COVID and Ireland, and his great love affair with Australia over many, many years. But before we get into all of that, let's have a listen to a song off his 2020 album, Bittersweet Crimson, called The Beauty of Everyday Things.
Summer's upon us, blackbird sweetly sings, cuckoo rules in the meadow, the beauty of everyday things. Nature basks in sunlight, summery long days bring peace and love and freedom, the beauty of everyday things. Man's in the doorway, I know the old song he sings. We laugh looking over the ocean, the beauty of everyday things. The hurler is conducting, made feel like Christy rain. Thousands witness magic, the beauty of everyday things. Of everyday things, the beauty of everyday things. I dive off the pier in Glenina like a teenage submarine. Hold my life's breath tightly, the beauty of everyday things. Heat on aging faces, oblivious to blame. Good times together, the beauty of everyday things. Feeling, but it's no good to cling. Learn the hunter's patience, the beauty of everyday things. Won't be long till Christmas is slipping into spring. Keep the home fire burning, the beauty of everyday things. The beauty of everyday things. The beauty of everyday things. life?
Life's pretty good. I live in North Queensland in Cairns.
Oh, what's that like? Must be very hot now, is it?
It's pretty hot, but we're just getting to the end of it, and a lot of rain coming in.
Too much rain. Worried about it?
Yeah, we just then the heavy rain warning for like the next week. So it's going to
Wow.
be a lot of wet, but we've had a lot of rain here in Australia this year.
I'm aware of it, yeah. But I'm aware of Lismore and all that awfulness.
Yeah, so you would have known a lot of those areas. Like normally we would
Yeah.
have just come back from Blues Fest, and it's been pretty wet down there.
Was Byron affected badly? Was it?
Byron's main street was about a metre of water through there about 4 weeks ago.
Jesus. And they managed to have the festival.
Yeah, like the festival was pretty muddy, but it happened because it all dried up the week before.
Did they lose any stages?
Now all the stages were there, but there was only four international acts.
Wow. I wish the fuck I was one of them.
Well, it would have been touch and go, because
Wow.
our lockdown just changed in January with international people.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, yeah. So what international acts made it?
Morchiba came. I didn't go this year, the first year in about 15 years, but
Right.
Morchiba came and George Benson played.
Wow.
And I saw him in Sydney. It was amazing. He's 80 years old.
I was just going to say, wow, he's 80.
Yeah.
Fucking hell. Good man, George. Wow.
And his voice was just amazing,
Wow.
So
Where did he play in Sydney?
he played at the State Theatre. I think you've played there before.
I did once. I loved it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful theatre.
Wonderful theatre.
So he played there, and every seat's got a good view in that theatre.
Yeah.
So it's just fantastic. So where are you today?
I'm at home in the village of Quilty, which is on the west of Ireland. I can see the sea out the window. It's a lovely day, and I had a burst pipe yesterday, which is why I'm a little bit stuck for time, because there are issues being dealt with today. But life is great. Life is quiet, but life is great.
And, you would have been, you've played Blues Fest. How many times have you played Blues Fest?
Oh, man. 7 or 8 times.
Yeah. So,
Loved it. Always loved it. Always absolutely loved it. Just really special. I mean, but I feel the same way about even the smaller festivals, like that lovely Blue Mountain Festival in Katoomba. Love it. What's the other one? The great one. Oh my God.
Have you played Port Fairy Folk Festival?
Yeah, Port Fairy. Of course, loads of times. Great.
So you come from a musical family. Music can come from families, but what do you think the main influence was on you to pursue a career in music? Like, it's been a hell of a career. 40 years, 27 albums.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is I only realized last week that this year is the 50th anniversary of my first paid gigs. I was the opening act for my brother's band, Planksty. They released a quite a famous, legendary album called the Black Album. And when they toured that, I was the opening act for about 5 or 6 gigs. And, I got £15 a night to sing on stage for half an hour, singing my own songs under my real name, Barry Moore. But yeah, I suppose my real working life didn't take off until I created Luka Bloom in around 1987. So it's been full on since then. But yeah, it's been a really amazing life. I mean, I've never come across a singer who's my age. I'm 67 now. I'll be 67 in a month's time. I've never come across a singer who, when asked about his career, said he wished he had a different job. It's an immense privilege, and I maybe appreciate it more now than I ever have done at any point in my life, probably because of COVID.
Yeah, I spoke to Shane Howard last week, and he's around your age, from the band Goanna, who wrote Solid Rock. And
I know Shane.
He just said it's just a beautiful privilege to be able to live his life this way.
Yeah, it really is, and I've never really taken it for granted. But I think at this time more than ever,
I've been doing some small shows in Ireland recently, and you know, when you've been isolated for so much of the last 2 years, to find yourself in front of even 80 or 100 people singing your songs, it's an immense privilege. And yeah, I'm really leaning into the gratitude side of things at the moment.
You've mentioned there that, you transitioned from Barry Moore to Luka Bloom. And I think, we read about it. This happened when you were living in New York. Can you just tell me a little bit about how that happened? Yep.
Well, the transition actually happened before I went to New York, because the simple truth of it, Nathan, is that I knew by the age of 14 or 15 I wanted to write songs and sing them, that was going to be my life. I was already writing my own songs and being influenced by songwriters. And so between 1978 and 1986, I released 3 albums under my real name, and they just completely nosedived. They were naive. I hadn't actually found my voice as a singer-songwriter, and the first album had something a little bit charming, but the other 2 that followed it were not good. And at that point, I could have just disappeared. But something happened in the mid-'80s. Well, the first thing that happened was that I stopped drinking. I became drug and alcohol free in the early 80s. And while I was still a bit of a mess in many ways in my life, I was beginning to get together musically. And by the mid-'80s, I realized that I'd begun to write songs that had potential. And I'd found a way of accompanying myself that was a bit different from other people. I'd found a way into a sound in my guitar, which is the landscape for my songs, that sounded a bit different from other people's. And so I realized that I was in with a shot, but that I had a limited amount of time to make it happen. And I needed to do 2 things. I needed to create an identity for my songs, and I needed to get out of Ireland.
So you went to New York, and is it true that Luka comes from the Suzanne Vega song?
Yeah, I'd never heard the song. I was aware of Suzanne Vega because I had her first album, the one with Marlena and Watches on the Wall. Beautiful song. I love that first album. But then when the album with Luka came out, I was already thinking about names. And initially I was going to look for some kind of an Irish name, and I had quite a few names related to like my mother's maiden name and stuff like that. But I decided to go full tilt boogie and just create an anonymous identity for my music that had no, and some people misinterpreted that as a desire on my part to distance myself from Ireland or from my family. That was never the case. I mean, I'm still living in Ireland. I'm still very close to my family. It was a very simple, pragmatic and creative decision to, I was aware of people like Sting and Bono, which aren't exactly English or Irish sounding names. And The Edge, for God's sake. I mean, what's that about? And now everybody is quite happy to refer to David Evans as The Edge, which is fantastic. And that was when I decided to just go full tilt and create a name. And that song came out, My Name is Luka. And then that gave me a connection to New York. And then the Bloom thing comes from James Joyce. I mean, of course it's completely pretentious, but it's just a nickname for me, and it's an identity for my songs.
And it's an amazing thing for artists to be able to transition, obviously for you, from your youthful music into who you've become now. Like Bob Dylan did it. So many people have just changed their names and moved on.
Yeah, for me, it was just like creating a band. I remember, it happened around the time that Sting left the Police, which meant that he would now be simply trading as Sting. And that kind of struck me. I thought, wow, there's someone who's no longer trading under his band's name. He's trading under another name, which, by the way, isn't his real name either. And so, a lot of people thought I was nuts because I'd had these 3 albums out, but it was, what do they say? Desperation is the mother of invention. And that's what happened.
You talk about how your love for Ireland and you still live there. And I was reading Gabriel Byrne's book over Christmas, and he talks about the Dublin of his childhood. And you grew up in Kildare, and obviously you've moved across to the West Coast. But how have you seen Ireland change throughout your life?
Wow, my God. It's in many ways unrecognizable for reasons which are both good and bad. I mean, gosh, that's a big question. Like,
I ask it because, he's talking about, he goes to visit his home where he grew up, and these are the fields that I used to walk through, and it's just unrecognizable to him now. And he's lived in America for a very long time. And I'd just sort of be interested to hear from someone that's lived there for most of their life.
yeah, I mean, okay. So just to speak about that, my hometown, like Newbridge was a town which had a population of about 4,000 growing up, and the pubs would have been all busy. There would have been a bit of employment. There were 2 or 3 employers, factories in the town, and there was an army base in that. So, I mean, that's a completely transformed town now. That now has a population of 24 or 25,000 people, of whom maybe 4,000 are Polish. So when I was a young man in Ireland, in my hometown, we all knew what it was to be Irish. It was white, mostly Catholic, English speaking, English and Irish speaking, the Irish language as well. But I'm not sure about this, but I think the second most spoken language in Ireland today is Mandarin. And I think the third most spoken language in Ireland today is Polish. And the 4th or 5th most spoken language in Ireland today is Irish. It's a completely different country. I mean, I grew up in a country that wasn't in the EU. I grew up in a country that was still taking all its inspiration for everything, food, sport, from the nearest neighbor, the former oppressor. Now, like, Ireland is a financial hub. It's a very prominent nation within the European Union. It's very proactive in terms of helping the people of Ukraine as an active member of the European community. We were completely on the fringes of Europe. And in my childhood, we were still looking over across the big pond to America for everything. I can still remember, even though I was only 7 years old, I'm old enough to remember the euphoria when John F. Kennedy visited Ireland. It was unbelievable. I don't know if that would be the case today to the same extent, because I think we've matured a lot. And there are really good things about that. Like, I noticed that, for example, there are towns in Ireland that would have had maybe 15 or 20 or 25 or 30 active, busy pubs where people were just drinking and getting drunk all the time, right up to maybe the 90s or the 2000s. But there mightn't have been any nice restaurants. There have been a few chippies and things like that. Whereas now a lot of Irish people are very proud of the way the whole food culture thing has been evolving. And some of this I credit to the fact that we've become a part of Europe. And so a lot of the pubs are kind of struggling and they're not doing as well. And so a town that had maybe 15 or 20 pubs now maybe has 3 or 4. But now that town might have 3 or 4 cafes. It might have 3 or 4 restaurants. I mean, there are so many ways. Like, for example, the country would have been run largely to a large extent by what we call county councils. You'd have had states like you would have in Australia. They wouldn't have the same autonomy as the states you have in Australia. But we have these counties. There's 32 counties on the whole island. In the Republic of Ireland, there's 26. And they would have been quite powerful. And they would have been building houses. So, for example, the power of the county councils is not what it used to be. That kind of power has all been centralized. So decisions relating to health and education and housing in Ireland today are much more centralized than they used to be. And in some ways, they're more organized, but in other ways, they're less humane. And like a lot of the world, a lot of life in Ireland has been privatized. A lot of activities around health have been privatized. So we've matured, we've grown up a lot. We're a very active democracy. You know, we're not on the fringes of Europe anymore. We're physically on the fringes of Europe, but not philosophically or politically. But there are certain changes that have happened in Ireland that I'm not crazy about. But these are changes that are happening in the world. The growth of corporate bodies, the growth of corporations, politically, even in terms of the power they wield. I don't see it as being good for the world, and I certainly don't see it as being good for Ireland. There's a diminishing of the power of our governments to make decisions for its citizens that I find seriously troubling. But it's still a great country. It's a completely different country. I've had to challenge myself even about what it means to be Irish today, because I'm sharing this republic with people for whom English is their second language. And if they have any Irish at all, it's way down the list because they're from China, they're from America, they're from all over Europe, and they're not they anymore. It's all a big us. And for the most part, I really love that. I think we're a better country for being more open and more out there in our outlook. And Irish people have traveled a lot around the world, and then now people are traveling here. You know, we've a lot of inward migration now. We never had that. I mean, we exported people for generations, but now there's probably more people coming into Ireland than there are leaving it.
It's amazing. The reason I asked that question is because I listen to your music, and that you can hear the rich culture of Irish music, Irish storytelling, and you know, you've touched on it now, the globalization of Irish culture. How do you think that's going to affect music, art, poetry, and the arts really in Ireland moving forward?
Hard to say. I think when you're someone like myself who's kind of in the coalface of your own work in life, I don't think too largely about the big picture like that, because I'm always thinking about the next song, the next bit of creativity, which I know is it's a very selfish way to be in this world of creativity, but you're constantly observing. I think one of the things that was fascinating for me about Ireland, and it's a tricky one, this, is that it wasn't a career for people. When I particularly began to travel in the 70s in the west of Ireland, people just played music. They were small farmers, you know, they had different jobs. And then in the evening, they just got together and played music. And there still is some of that. There still is, you know, we still have people who are teachers and have jobs who just like to get together at nighttime and play. And that's still very strong. And we've got a very rich culture of singing and playing music here. And it's been seriously monetized. The traditional culture of Ireland has been, and why not? Why shouldn't people who 10 years ago were teachers or nurses or whatever they were, be earning really good money touring the world with Riverdance or whatever they're doing? It's fantastic. And why shouldn't people who were small farmers be able to go on tour and enjoy being on the road in Germany and being treated well, and people buying tickets to come and hear them? It's fantastic. I completely celebrate that. But in terms of the long-term impact of that way of life on Irish cultural life, as from a musical perspective, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I don't even know if people have the same value around the sitting around and playing music and having a chat and singing songs without any financial reward. I don't know if that has the same value for people that it did even 15 or 20 years ago. But like, life is evolving, and the nature of our experience of culture and music is evolving all the time. And I think that maybe in years to come, that people will come to remember the beauty of those simple shared experiences of just being in a room together and playing music just for the fun of it. I mean, for myself, I know that one of the gifts of COVID was that because of being forced off the road and being much more in isolation, I reacquainted myself with the simplicity of sitting at home and playing my guitar for nobody, exactly the way I did when I was 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, and I enjoyed it.
That kind of leads into my next question, which is your new album that you recorded during lockdown. It's
Yeah,
just a totally instrumental album, and
yeah.
I've been listening to that for the last week or so. Some of the tracks, and they're just really beautiful and haunting. So
Thank you, Nate.
I want to play a couple of those, but if you could just tell me about how that came about, because when I'm listening to it, it really sounds like this has just started somewhere, like a jam, and then it's just evolved out of that.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened. So March 2020, we kind of all thought, oh, this COVID thing will probably last a couple of months, and we'll be back on the road before the end of the summer. But like everyone else, I lost some fairly significant tours in 2020, and then 2021 the same. 2022 is not that different. But there's a great Irish man who was born and lived in Australia for his right up to, I don't know what age he was when he came to Ireland, but Steve Cooney is an absolute legend of Irish music who's an Australian citizen. And he's been living here for over 40 years. And he's really, for me, he's kind of transformed certainly the way people accompany Irish music. He is my favorite guitar player in the whole world. And I've had the privilege of recording with him and gigging with him. And he's just a blessing to us. And right at the start of the COVID time, coincidentally, he released his first debut album, because he's always played with other people and he's always played with bands and stuff. But he decided to release an album of ancient Irish harp music played on guitar. It's a really stunning record, and it got me through the first month or two of lockdown, and it inspired me to go on my own journey. And I began by learning one or two of the tunes from Steve's album. And then I began to write some. And in some of the pieces I wrote, I was directly reflecting on things that happened to me and people around me during COVID. There's a piece there called I Hear You, which was inspired by the loss of two friends during COVID, and people I only got to speak to on the phone in the last days of their life. I couldn't visit them. We had no funerals. It was heartbreaking. And I wrote that piece of music to just say that I hear you, and I feel what you're going through, and in as much as I can be through this piece of music, I'm with you. And I say about this album out of the blue, the album came out of the blue just like the COVID did. And what I like to say about it is that for me, it's the most emotionally articulate album I've ever made without one single word being on it. And I would never have made this album without COVID. I wouldn't have had the patience. I wouldn't have taken the time to go back into the early days of my guitar playing, and to reawaken that and then bring it into the here and now with this music. And I really love it. I hope to God I get to come back to Australia soon and play some of these pieces for Australian audiences.
I was going to say, that was one of my last questions is, do you think you're going to get back on the road and get to Australia anytime soon?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I'm going to Holland and Belgium in a few weeks' time for about 10 days. But I'm also aware that in 2022, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of artists, all of whom are bigger than me, who are queuing up to be included in promoters' tour schedules for the rest of 2022 and probably into 2023. I haven't been to Australia since March 2019. And I really miss it. I really miss Australia. Australia is my lucky land, my home away from home. It's a country that I can't even explain it. After a year or two away from Australia, I kind of start to long for it. I start to watch documentaries about Australia. I did a whole series of Netflix shows recently about train journeys in Australia. And I thought, God, what wouldn't I give to go and do a train journey from Darwin to Adelaide because I just love it there, and I feel completely at home when I'm in Australia. So I really hope that it won't be too long. I suspect, I'm kind of thinking it might be March 2024. So I really just have to stay in good health.
You said you can't explain your love for Australia, but you gave it a really good crack on your song called Australia. And I'd just like you to talk a little bit about how that song came about.
It's a song about longing.
It sounds like a love song, you know.
Yeah. I mean, and there is a love in there in that song, and there are, there are people I really care about, and there's someone in particular that I made a strong connection with in Western Australia, and it happens, and it's a beautiful thing, but distance is distance, and as you get older in life, you become accustomed to separation and distance, and I also think you get a different handle on the realm of longing, and you can experience longing for a place or a person, but sort of be okay with it because you just have a better acceptance of life. And again, one of the interesting things about COVID was that prior to COVID, if you decided you wanted to come to Ireland or the UK from Australia, you could pick 5 or 6 or 10 airlines. You'd have a huge choice of ways to travel, that all of which would get you here within 30 hours or 24 hours. That's changed now. And suddenly, because of this pandemic, Australia is a faraway place again. I wanted to write a love song to Australia. And I always tend to do better when I focus a love song on a person. But the love I have for Australia itself as a nation and as a massive land and as a country, it's akin to a love you might have for a person. And I've felt it from the very beginning, even though my first visit to Australia was difficult because I made the mistake of going in January, and I stepped out of Sydney airport and it was like over 40 degrees. And I walked back into the airport, I got such a shock because I had left Dublin, it was -5. And suddenly I walked out of Sydney airport and I thought I was going to die. And an hour later, I'm in the old Siebel townhouse in King's Cross. And I'm looking out the window and there's fellas jogging. And I'm like, what the fuck? And you get used to it. But I never went back to Australia again in January. I wait till March now because that's when the festivals are and that's when the weather's cooled a little bit. But, I've been 14 times. I've given 2 years of my life to Australia in increments of 7 weeks at a time. And I miss it every time I leave. And I just get so excited every time I know I'm coming back. So hopefully it won't be too long, Nathan.
I'm a bit younger than you. And so people from my generation, our kind of first introduction to Luka Bloom was the covering of LL Cool J's song in 1992, sure. I Need Love. And I just wanted to know, that it's a rap song. Where were you when you heard it? What made you think, hey, I'm going to do an acoustic cover of this song?
Well, it was a musical thing more than anything else. I mean, I was living in New York at that stage for about a year or so, and this music was everywhere. It was, and music is an environmental experience as well as an emotional experience. So wherever you are, you're going to feed off the sounds that are around you. And I was never really tuned into rap or hip hop at all. And until I got to New York, and there it was everywhere. And I always liked the rhythm of it. I just struggled with a lot of the lyrics and the lack of melody in the lyrics. But at a certain point, I thought to myself, it might be an interesting challenge to try and find a way to give an Irish context to some of this music and see, can I bring something of myself? And I went in search of a song that appealed to me. And I loved the rhythm of this song. I loved LL Cool J's performance of it. It's a pretty powerful message in there. And it took me months. That came out on the Acoustic Motorbike, which was in 1992. But I had the song learned by the time I was recording Riverside. And I'd been doing it at my gigs in New York before I recorded Riverside. And the record company and everyone saying, you've got to include that song. You have to. And I was like, no, I haven't got it yet. I haven't nailed it yet. When I release that song, it has to be right. And I had to wait another 2 years and for that second album. But I'm glad I waited, because by the time it got another 2 years of it. It took me that long to kind of inhabit it and just be present in it. And because a song and the performance of a song, it kind of has to be believable. It has to be real. And it really took me a while to inhabit that song.
I think for a lot of Australians, they might not have known who LL Cool J was at that
Wow.
stage in Australia. So when they've heard that song, that, you know, it's brought that to their attention. Maybe have you ever met LL Cool J? Or has anyone ever
No,
told you what he thought about it?
a Warner Brothers driver spoke to the guy who signed me to Warner's, and he told him that he played LL Cool J, my version of I Need Love, in the taxi one day, in the car one day. And the only response I got was, cool. Well, I'll tell you what's really cool for LL Cool J. My version of that song has probably gotten more airplay than a lot of songs that I've ever written. And he would have found it quite cool, the fact that, you know, he takes 100% of the royalty from it. So best of luck to him.
I'm sure he does think it's cool. You talk on your website, so your new album, it's not on Spotify. You know, you can download the album or buy the CD or the record. And I just wanted to talk about this because you mentioned on your website, you know, the reasons why you do that. You know, your sister Anne does your distribution. You know, can you just talk a bit, because a lot of your other stuff is on Spotify, but, you know, you did the similar thing with your previous album and also this album. So I was just hoping you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, some of my stuff is on Spotify, and I would have done licensing deals over the years with various record companies, and, you know, so my stuff ends up on Spotify. And, you know, I have no problem with progress as long as it actually constitutes progress. And I'm just not entirely sure that a system of delivery of music whereby the only person involved in the process who gets pretty much nothing, earns nothing from the process, is the person who created it. You know, I can't imagine somebody building a car and being happy that all over the world people are driving their car if everybody else involved in the creation of the car, is earning good money from it, except the person who actually came up with the original idea. So that's my problem with Spotify. It's not just Spotify, it's all the streaming services. And so, you know, you can go two ways with this kind of stuff. I'm not really a great businessman. I'm not wealthy, but I've earned whatever I've earned to get me through life, and I'm really happy with that. And I've no bitterness or resentment or any of that kind of thing. And I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be talking to lawyers. I'm not interested in chasing down things that I feel I'm entitled to. I want to try and do the best I can each day to just be with songs and to present songs. And so I will try and find a creative solution for this. And my creative solution is just to go directly to the website. I do use, as little as possible, the Facebook page as well, to just say things to people in a general way. Like, if you're considering buying a record of mine, it would be beautiful if you consider buying it from my website, because number one, you're getting it from me directly via my beautiful sister Anne. So you're adding to her life, you're adding to my life, and you're also adding to the life of my community, because she posts the CDs from the local post office, and post offices all over Ireland are being closed down. And the fact that I'm one of the people bringing a bit of business to Milltown Malbay's post office is a beautiful thing. When I release an album, you know, a lot of CDs go into the local post office. So there's a little sort of ecosystem of people who earn a little when people buy a CD. And for the future, a kind of a plan I have for this year is that I don't particularly like seeing my stuff up on Spotify. So I've decided that I'm going back over the 50 years I've been writing songs. And I'm thinking that this year I'm going to do stripped down solo acoustic versions of about 50 of my songs that I've written over the years. And I'm going to make that available as individual downloads on my website. And if people like that idea, I may even produce a triple CD or something like that for the end of the year of just songs from my home from across 50 years.
So Paul Kelly, the Australian singer, he did these shows called A to Z, where he just started on A and across 5 nights played, A to D, F to, and they were pretty amazing shows,
He did a
So
lot
that
of songs.
sounds, yeah, he's got a lot of songs, but it kind of sounds similar to what you're talking about there, just reimagining some of your songs.
Yeah, I've already started doing this here at home, and it's really lovely. I've reconnected myself with a song that I wrote in 1976, and I love it. I absolutely love it. But I haven't sung it for over 30 years.
Does it feel like a different person wrote that song when you think back?
Oh,
Is
yeah. Yeah. I can hear all the innocence in it. It's nice to reconnect with a bit of your innocence.
Yeah. You use one of my photos for your book, and, I read it and I see how much you just love cycling around Ireland.
I'm going for a cycle shortly today.
So, when did your love of cycling, where did it come from? Why do you love it so much? Because you talk about having your little camera in your pocket and taking some photos. So I just wanted to know a little bit about that. Does it clear your head, or do you think of songs while you're doing that? Or
I was always a bit of a dreamer, and I was always a bit of a loner. And I think a lot of the time, even in my youth, I was a bit more, to be honest about it, kind of lost in this world and struggling to make sense of the world. And there were 2 ways by the age of 14 that I was able to be at peace with myself. One was playing my guitar, and the other was just the bike, just out on the bike cycling. And I grew up in a very flat county with a race course and mountains in the distance, but really perfect cycling country. And I never was competitive about it. I never really cycled in races or anything. I just love to cycle. I love the rhythm of it. And I can actually hear in some of my songs, I can hear a kind of a pulse or a rhythm that I equate with being on good long cycles. Where I live now is just glorious country for cycling right beside me. And I'm not far from the ocean. There's no mountains. The roads are flat and good, and there's not that many people around, so it's not dangerous. It's about dreaming. It's about other people get great peace and go into a meditational landscape by sitting in front of a candle. I completely respect that, and there are moments in my life when I'm able to do that. But for me, probably one of the great meditations in my life is just being out on the bike, just the bike, the road, and me.
So one of the videos I watched today on your YouTube channel was shot with a drone, and I'm assuming that's you cycling.
Yeah.
I can see how you can say that's so peaceful and quiet and amazing, because it just looks like there's absolutely no one around at all.
Yeah, I think that song is called Visions of 2020, which is a kind of a fascinating song, because it's fascinating because I wrote it in 2019. If you listen to it and the words in it, it's like a premonition of 2020. It's a premonition of COVID. It's good. And the guy who did that drone footage, he's done my last 3 videos, and I love them because he really captures the beauty of County Clare. And I'm just like this little presence way below on the bike going around Blackhead in North County Clare. That's one of my favorite videos. I love it.
I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
And please pass that on to him.
I will pass that on to Matthew. I absolutely will. He'll be thrilled.
I'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for your time today, Luka, and for having a chat with me.
It's been a real pleasure. Yeah, it'd be great to see you. Great to see you, Nathan. And best of luck to you and your family. And lovely. I really enjoyed this. I'm so glad we did it.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time.
All the very best to you.
Okay, thanks, mate. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Hope you enjoyed my chat with Luka Bloom today on Words and Music. The last song I played was I Hear You off Luka's new album, Out of the Blue. Go check it out, maybe even buy a copy from his website at lukabloom.com. This is Nathan Kelly, and you're listening to Words and Music.